Is up? This is Jake Codeweiss with Mastering.com. Welcome to your greatest asset. Here's what we're going to cover. Referencing. How to find references. How to use references. Let's start with referencing. Once upon a time, there were two artists, and each one was commissioned to create a portrait of Justin Bieber. The first artist was given an actual photo of Justin Bieber, and the second artist was asked to create his portrait from memory. As you can imagine, the first artist's portrait turned out way better than the second artist, and that's because he had a point of reference. The first artist had a target to shoot for that helped guide his decisions, whereas the second artist was working blind. So which one would you rather present to an audience or a potential client? Which one of these pictures? Pretty easy choice, right? This is the concept. This is the principle of referencing, and it's one of the most important lessons in this whole program. Your reference is your anchor. Your greatest asset is being able to listen to one source, dissect it, and identify what you're hearing, and apply that to your own work. In music production, you reference by selecting tracks released by other artists in your genre that you can use for inspiration and comparison. References are the target that you shoot for, the X on the treasure map. They're going to help anchor you. Comparing your track to references is the absolute best way to know if you're heading in the right direction and making production choices that make sense for your genre. If you're ever unsure of what something should sound like, listen to your references. They're going to help guide you until you get enough practice and experience and skill to be able to do this instinctually. So how do you find references? Streaming services like Spotify, Apple Music, etc. Think about similar artists. Who are some artists that your music would fit well next to in a festival lineup or in a playlist? Think about the vibe or the genre, right? What are some songs that sound similar to yours in genre, in instrumentation, in tempo, and energy, etc.? Use new release playlists for the most up-to-date production standards and trends in your genre. So, for example, if you're working in pop music, you should be targeting playlists that have the most up-to-date and relevant production standards for your genre. On the other hand, if you're creating music just for yourself and you don't really care to have the most up-to-date production standards, you would rather make it sound like something that may have been released, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, you can use references from that era. It really all depends on the kind of sound that you're going for. And finally, you can use a website called musicmap.com. Here it is. It's really easy to use. You type the name of an artist to find it on the map. Let's say Taylor Swift. Enter. And it'll show you all of the artists similar to Taylor Swift. The ones closer to the Taylor Swift name are more similar, and the ones further away are less similar, right? So this could be a neat little tool that you can use if you're stuck trying to find references. Or you can always ask for help in the community. Next, how to use references. So after you've selected a reference or a few songs that you want to use as references, you can just buy and download them from Amazon or another website. Typically, you can download music files for $1. Once you've done that and downloaded the files to your computer, all you have to do is import them into your DAW and then compare your work against your reference tracks. That's how we use references in the music production game. And you can compare frequency curves by using a frequency analyzer. This is how you can meter frequencies and visually see the difference between your track and your reference tracks. You can use the analyzer either directly on any EQ plugin. Most EQ plugins have a frequency analyzer built right into them, or you can use a standalone analyzer plugin like I'm showing you here on the right. It doesn't really matter what tool you use. The point is to have a visual aid to show you where the differences may or may not be occurring on the spectrum. Over time, you're going to develop the instincts to be able to hear these things and target them on your own, or at least much easier. But the real speed and efficiency comes into play when you're able to marry what you're seeing with what you're hearing. So I'm going to show you an example of what this actually looks like inside the DAW. So here I've got a bounce of my mix already inside the DAW. Let's take a little bit of a listen here. Great. And I've already chosen and downloaded a reference that I want to use for this track. I'm going to go ahead and import it. I'm just going to drag it right into the DAW. And we can see that it's already quite a bit louder just by looking at the waveform. So I'm going to go ahead and use the region gain function to bring that level down so that when we compare our reference track to our mix, we're getting an apples to apples comparison, and we've got it nice and level matched. We're not listening to a really loud mix versus a really quiet mix. Right? So let's bring that down. I'm just doing this by sight, and then we're going to listen. Right? So I'm going to rename this reference. I'm going to mute it, and then when I want to listen to the reference track, all I have to do is solo it, and it'll automatically mute my mix and just solo this one. Right? So let's kind of listen back and forth here. Really bring this down just a touch more. I think that's pretty good. What I'd like to do is line up the chorus sections. So I think this is probably a chorus over here. So we can compare the choruses again, just to get more of an apples to apples comparison. That's pretty good, probably just a touch more, and we were pretty adequately level matched. A little bit more. I'm listening for the snare. I'm trying to level match based on the snare drums. That's pretty good. So now we're going to use a frequency analyzer to check out the sonic differences between my mix and the reference track. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to pull up frequency analyzer. I'm using the PAS analyzer from Waves. I like this one. You can use whichever one you like. So we've got my mix on the left side, and then we've got the reference track on the right side. And we don't even necessarily have to hear any audio to see what's going on here, right? So if I were to turn this stereo out down and then just play the tracks, you'll see the reading of the frequency curve. Here it is. Now, this tells us something very interesting, right? Our reference track has a curve that starts up here and just kind of is pretty flat, actually. You know, maybe a gentle sloping down. But my mix has a gap in the frequency spectrum here. There's a dip there, and then there's a dip here, right? So it's very telling. Let's just take a listen. First my track, then the reference. We can also see that my mix has a little bump here, a little bit higher in the low end of the frequency spectrum. So let's try to fix it. Let's use EQ. I'm going to go to my mix. I'm going to add an EQ plugin, and I'm going to put it before my analyzer so that I can see the kind of changes I'm making as I'm making them. Okay, so I've got my mix here on the left. I've got my reference on the right. I've got my EQ down here. And our goal is to make this frequency curve look more like this one using just some basic EQ. I have a good idea here, right? The differences are this is dipped, so we're going to want to boost that up. This section is dipped as well. We're going to want to boost that up and maybe just take down a little bit of the low end here. Let's go for it. See the difference? Now we've got an EQ curve that looks much more like our reference track. Let's hear the difference. I'm going to turn the EQ off and then back on again. Thin, right? Lacking all of that body and lacking the presence in that upper mid-range. And then we add that body in, we take down a little bit of the low end, and we add that mid-range in. And we've got a curve that looks more like our reference track. Let's compare the two just using our ears. Now we have to turn up our reference track just a little bit more because we boosted frequency content on our mix, which boosts the overall volume. Pretty good. There's still a little bit more high end in this mix in our reference track than there is in my mix, but overall, we're in the ballpark. And the reason why we were able to do that so quickly is because we're using these kind of measurement tools to help marry our ears and our eyes. So here are your action items. First, I want you to download the final mix and the reference track that we've provided for you below this lesson. Then, I want you to import them into your DAW. Level match the reference to the final mix the same way I just showed you. Then fix the final mix using an analyzer and an EQ, the same way I just demonstrated. Now, I'm not going to give you the same tracks that I used. I'll give you a different final mix. I'm going to give you a different reference and use these tools. Just go through this process the same way I just showed you. Do your best. You're not going to get graded on this or anything. It's really just to kind of unlock your brain to some of the tools and some of the techniques and some of the ways that we can manipulate and think about audio. So go and get that done. If you have any questions or you get confused while you're going through this exercise, don't hesitate to ask in the community or come to one of the mentorship calls. We're here to help. Don't stay stuck. Refuse to stay confused. I'll see you in the next lesson.